Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast daily. It is a Tuesday morning, and that is Bill Landis, and I am Austin Ward, and we are now 2 weeks away from the start of Ohio State spring practice. I think this is the longest countdown that I've ever had for the start of something that ultimately doesn't make a great deal of difference when the games actually matter in September, other than for our own amusement and educational purposes, of course, and preparation for those guys on the field. But I don't think that there are a lot of other people that share our enthusiasm for the offseason ending and spring camp beginning.
Yeah, I don't know. It must just be because we're doing the daily podcast now, and I don't think either of us really in that mode prior to this. So this does feel like an especially long wait for spring ball to start. I find myself longing for it in a way that I have not in years previous, but I am very much ready for spring ball to start.
Okay, and when it does, we will be looking at every position, but today we're going to continue our previews by looking at the defensive line. The last couple groups that we have left are in the trenches. We have to save offensive line for last for Bill, just so that he can properly build up the excitement for that. So Larry Johnson's group here, the Rushmen, I think the way that we described the cornerbacks, like the defensive line was maybe just fine last year. I think it could have been better and it could have been worse. I think there are lots of reasons that we could talk about both. So this conversation is a little bit tricky because I think you have to put in context a year ago, and then that sets the stage for a pretty, I don't know, fascinating spring for this group, because there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of experience that has to be replaced, and not maybe the most deep unit that Ohio State has had there.
It doesn't feel particularly deep. It doesn't mean that it can't become deep at some point, but that means that there's a really important spring coming for a handful of players in that kind of second year group for Larry Johnson. I'm glad you mentioned the corners because similar to how I feel about them and wanting to like put the BIA moniker on the shelf for a second, I kind of feel the same way about the Rushmen. Because I also feel like that this group has not quite lived up to that standard over the last few years. I mean, not quite in the same way as the cornerbacks have fallen short, but while I agree that there was a lot of good for the defensive line last year, and I think they were better, especially against the run, largely last year than they were the year before, and even probably the year before that. There's just like there's something missing. Like there's another level. It feels like that this group can get to, and I don't know why it's been such a struggle to get them there over the last couple of years. Maybe part of that is the way we evaluate defensive lines changing, and perhaps I'm guilty of being slow to coming around to that. And it's not so much about sacks; it's more about pressure. It's not maybe so much about TFLs and stuff like that anymore. But like I feel like there's like a middle ground there that Ohio State should still be striving for, and I'm not quite sure that it's met that yet. And when you look at the guys who are coming back, like there's some real potential star power, but it's like I felt that the last couple of years, and for some reason the guys just haven't quite gotten to that point. So like I feel like they can be good, but I want to know if they can be great. Like, can they be elite? Can they get back to the defensive lines that Ohio State has had in the past that have really taken over games and frankly sort of been like the forward facing unit of the team, because it's not been that way for a while.
Yeah, I think the expectation is the one that can help lead the way is you have JT Tuimoloau coming back. We saw just merely one of the finest performances by a defensive lineman in college football history at Penn State last year by him. If there's another gear for him to tap into, that's a scary thought. I don't even know how much more to say about him. We know what he's likely to do. We know what he's already done. He's going to be the focus for Ohio State. What's far more uncertain is what exactly the role will be for Jack Sawyer, because those two came in together. They were supposed to be the twin wrecking forces on the outside, and we've seen with the Jack and Leo, we've seen or heard some of the back and forth going on there with Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles from earlier in the month. And, does he need to play Jack? Should he just be defensive end? Other people that, Zach Bourne believes that he should play 3 technique. It seems like there's a bunch of ideas for what to do with Jack Sawyer and no clear plan for what that would be. when you look at the rest of the depth chart, especially with Zach Harrison gone and Javante Jean-Baptiste leaving pretty unexpectedly, there's really no choice. Like Jack Sawyer has to play some position, and he's going to have to do it really well.
I had not considered Jack playing inside the way that Zach Warren had suggested might be a possibility, but I did find myself like, oh, that sounds interesting, maybe. But then it's like you're just further depleting like the defensive end. It's like then what do you do with defensive end? So I don't know if that's actually on the horizon, but it is interesting nonetheless. It seems like everyone's preference would be that Mitchell Melton can play the jack position, as was the design going into last season before he unfortunately tore his knee up in the spring game. He is not a participant in spring ball, although it seems like he's doing some stuff, which is good. And the timeline of things suggests that he should be ready by the summer, but he's also a guy that's had multiple injury setbacks. So it's hard to bank on that. And then so you can't put all your eggs in that basket. I think that's the preference, that he's the guy and everyone else can sort of slot into their natural positions, but you have to have a plan B. And I'm assuming that would still be Jack Sawyer. I kind of floated the name Caden Curry to Larry Johnson and he kind of shot that down too. So I don't know what they're going to do there. Maybe the answer is they just don't use that position or use that sort of designation for a guy. And Jim Knowles kind of reworks his defense a little bit, but that also seems unlikely. So I don't know. The thing that I'm nervous about at the moment is that a kid with clearly a lot of talent, and it was rated accordingly so coming out of high school, and Jack Sawyer is going to get kind of stuck in between here and never really kind of tap into his full potential. Like that's the worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. And it feels to me like, not to sound alarm bells, but it seems to me like maybe we're trending in that direction a little bit. And it makes me nervous. I don't know. Maybe you can talk me down from that. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, I don't know, because I think that there was some, reluctance previously from Larry Johnson when he had a hybrid weapon like Baron Browning, and we would see like 3 or 4 glimpses of this, or he would even get to go through all of pregame warmups, working with the defensive line and working with Larry Johnson. And then it just never transpired. He's not, I don't know if the years had been shifted, or if Jim Knowles had got to coach Baron Browning, if he'd be like, yes, that's the ideal guy. We're going to make him a Jack or Leo. We're going to move him all around the field. That's all, speculation and hypothesizing on my part. But the end result for Baron Browning at Ohio State was that he never was the player that he's become and the impact that he's made at the NFL level while he was at Ohio State. He was a productive player. He was a good player, but there was more that I think all of us wanted to see him tap into. And I don't know there's still time for Jack Sawyer, mm-hmm. and potentially even 2 years to do so. That wasn't really anybody's projection when he arrived. The 5-star going to be out of here in 3 years and going to be another one of the first-round draft picks for Ohio State. He's not really on track for that because of what happened last year with the uncertainty of the position and the changes to him physically. I think what we saw a year ago and a lot of the things that Jim Knowles alluded to was like, we got to get him to play, more reckless and get more comfortable in the position. And maybe if that's where he stays, then in the second year he can really explode. But you've used this example a lot with Oklahoma State and putting a true freshman into that position and him instantly having an impact. I don't know that it's like the hardest position to learn, and that's easy for me to say. I'm not out there trying to do it. So I guess my talking you down from the ledge is to say I have no idea how it's going to work, and I don't know if I'm really concerned about it necessarily, but I don't think that it's happening at the rate that Ohio State or Jack Sawyer would have expected.
If you go and watch like some of the clinic tapes that Jim Knowles does on this position, he does not make it sound overly complicated. I think that is sort of the beauty of the position, is that he can tell that guy to, okay, on this play, you do this. There's no thinking, you do this. And if that doesn't take immediately, in my mind, like that should be like, okay, if this doesn't take immediately, probably not for him. Let's move on to somebody else. We never got to see really Mitchell Melton do it. It seemed like from the way they were talking about it that it was like a light bulb like went off in Jim Knowles' head immediately. Like, this is the guy. And they never got to use him. So if he can use them, I think they're okay. If he can't, then I'm not sure. I don't know. Do you have like a listen? We're just two guys talking about football. We're not coaches. We're not strength coaches.
Yeah.
but we have opinions on things. Do you think, like, what do you think they should do with Jack? Like, and I'm talking both like like physically, like does he need to get bigger? Does he need to get smaller? And then where do you think he should play?
I think Zach Bourne is one of the smartest people I know when it comes to football. When he
Hmm.
says something like this guy should play 3 technique, that that resonates with me. He again is only one person now. He's not coaching them either, but that's what he sees in Jack Sawyer, and he's also watched him play football before he got to Ohio State. So if that's his projection, I would lean towards that. I think that the only caution I would have to that in my response would be it didn't look like he was comfortable with the added weight on last year. I didn't think that he was moving at the level that we saw him in high school or even early on when he got to Ohio State. And that's not easy to do, to put on that much weight and to be asked to make those dramatic changes in a hurry. Um, you know, maybe if that's the path that they want to stay on, he'll become more comfortable with that. It won't have happened all at once, and he'll be able to acclimate physically to what they're asking him to do. Because if we're talking about going beyond like the jack and that stuff against the run, if he has to play inside and gets those responsibilities, I mean, how much more weight that like when Jay Sean Cornell did that, when Draymond Jones did that, when Adolphus Washington way back now a decade ago, like you've seen these guys who have pass rush skills tack on that weight and move inside, and it's natural for them. And I don't know if it is for Jack Sawyer at that weight, and if that would allow him to have the maximum impact. So the happy medium then would be you were recruited as a 5-star defensive end. That's what you should play. It almost feels like a cop out at this point because you're not picking a plan and fully executing it, but there's also nothing wrong with that. And that that may be where he's best suited, especially with this particular roster where you have one spot with JT Tuimoloau out, he's going to have it locked down. And then you have question marks about what will year 2 look like for Kenyatta Jackson? How will Amari Abor come back off of that injury? You don't know what you're going to have in Mitchell Melton if you alleviate the concern there. You don't know if they're going to move CJ Hicks or somebody like that to play down there. And even Caden Curry, I believe the total was only 78 snaps. I have it up here for something else that we're going to talk about, but like all those other moving pieces then impact Jack Sawyer. But I feel like, and I don't know what your answer is to those 3 spots, but like whatever it is, you have to figure out what you want to do with Jack Sawyer and then do the rest, in my opinion.
I think that's right. I think it all sort of pivots around him. I would. The funny thing about Jack is like when he got here, like he had a really good spring game, his first spring here, and we were talking with Larry Johnson about that. And I remember it became a little bit of a thing. Like Larry said, "Oh, Jack's a finesse player, and we need to get him to be more of a powerful player." And now I feel like he's only a powerful player. Like his bull rush is like the best thing that he does, and I think that's why Zach said what he said about Jack playing on the inside. I don't. I kind of feel like you should go back to leaning into the things that made him the guy that you had to have in that recruiting class. And I I just can't envision a world where Jack is like pushing 300 pounds and you move him inside, and maybe you can play 3 tech at around 270, 280 and do so effectively, but probably not in the Big Ten on an every game basis, playing 30, 40 snaps a game there. I just that seems difficult for me. So
Mhm.
I think I would like to see a reversion, I guess, back to what we were talking about with him a year ago, which was he's more of like a 260-pound guy who wins with athleticism and agility more than he does with power. There's probably some kind of balance there in between, but it feels like the scales have tilted too far toward building up that strength, and his agility has suffered a little bit because of that. And what you're left with, frankly, is like JT Tuimoloau is really good. He's not, in my opinion, like a pure just like speed guy. He's got a really good toolbox, but he's super powerful and he's quick off the ball. But you don't have that like elite bender around the edge as a pass rusher that I think Ohio State has had, with like the Boses and Chase Young. So
Mhm.
I don't. Jack probably can't become that anyway. But it does feel like to me they're lacking that a little bit at defensive end, and it makes me wonder if like maybe that's Kenyatta Jackson. If everything kind of takes for him in this second spring, he's like a long levered guy who's probably 250 pounds right now, if I had to guess. Maybe he can become that, and then you have like a nice little assortment of skill sets there that you can employ at the defensive end position. Because right now, I feel like it's all kind of the same. There's different levels of the same. Like JT is elite at being like a power end, but I would like to see a little bit more of that other stuff at that position if they can find it.
So if that's roughly the situation at defensive end, and we're also talking about really the scholarship numbers or relative lack of depth across the whole group, why are we saying that about defensive tackle, Bill?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of the defensive tackle group. Like, I still feel like their three best defensive tackles last year were Mike Hall, Tyleik Williams, and probably honestly Jerron Cage. And those were like the three guys that played the least. And Mike Hall and Tyleik Williams' snap counts combined were roughly equal to Teron Vincent's. Now, I guess the good thing is Larry will have no other choice but to play Mike Hall and Tyleik Williams. Or in theory, I don't know. Like, talk me through that. I guess how does it, like? Is he just gonna like Hero Canu's gonna play 500 snaps next year? Like, how's that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know how it's gonna work. I know that people got really tired of me talking about this last year with the rotation, and I think that that's going to get a bigger test in it and become a bigger question because, like, if you look at this group, and I know that he doesn't want to do it. He spoke about it. Well, I've got his comments there. Again from last month about playing fresh and being active. So I don't know. I'm just going to pick a defense at random. Let's say the number 9 scoring defense in the country. Who's that? Oh, that's Alabama. Okay. I don't know how that happened, but this team was used a lot by people inside the Woody, as a matter of fact. So, well, what are the snap counts there? And you can say Will Anderson is a unicorn, and I would agree with that. He played 685, and the positions are not the same even. Maybe this isn't a bad example. I shouldn't have picked it randomly. Will Anderson played 685 snaps. Dallas Turner played 648 snaps. Byron Young played 549 snaps. Those are the top 3 defensive linemen in that system for Alabama. We can argue about Will Anderson's role if it doesn't matter. That's 180 snaps more than JT Tuimoloau. That's effectively Alabama's best defensive player playing close to the line of scrimmage, and they played the same number of games. That, to me, doesn't make any sense. And I looked at Georgia's as well. They play a lot more defensive linemen. They do more like what Larry Johnson wants to do. They've also recruited at a much higher level. But when it comes to important situations and leverage situations, they put their best guys on the field. That is coming more anecdotally from people that cover that team that I talked to in Atlanta. So help me explain this. So yeah, they play a lot of guys, but they don't do it when the game is in the balance, or they don't just arbitrarily send somebody out in the red zone. And how does this relate to defensive tackle? I don't know. It's more of an overall thing that I just don't. Maybe that means that Larry Johnson will just play these guys and not try to sub out in the middle of possessions or make line changes. I don't know, but I think that if you're looking at this group right now, they're no matter what, they're going to need those guys to play. Like, he can't rotate if they only have 3 or 4 defensive ends and 3 or 4 defensive tackles. Like, maybe that will help. I don't know, but I felt crazy like looking at those numbers and comparing it. He said, well, lots of other teams rotate players. Yeah, they do. And you don't want to play every single snap with the same 4 people. I certainly understand that. My issue is more that the best players aren't playing 2/3 of the snaps, which is what Alabama's doing, and to almost the same extent, Georgia. Penn State was up there as well. That was also the way they did. They finished 10th in scoring distance, so they were right there, or scoring defense, so they were right there in my randomizer this morning. I should stop talking about it. I'm really rambling. It's because I can't wrap my mind around what Larry Johnson is saying and what's happening on the field on Saturdays.
It was, yeah, and I probably should have, because I was there when he was talking about it when we did the assistant coach interviews, and I should have probably pressed him on that more, because it's not the idea of rotating. I think everyone sees the merits of rotating. It's when you do it. It's how the practice is applied to the field. And when we're watching the Northwestern game, and for some reason it's a game, that's another issue entirely. But for some reason it's a game, and we're saying to ourselves, why is JT Tuimoloau not on the field? Why is he standing on the sideline with his hands on his hips and then practicing pass rush moves against nobody? He's shadow boxing on the sideline, waiting to get into the game when it is in the balance in the fourth quarter, in a game you cannot lose. And maybe there was no threat of losing, and that factored into it. I don't know. But that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. Why are you incurring penalties in the Peach Bowl, right? When you're trying to run guys off the field in crunch time, like you should know who your guys are who need to be on the field in that moment, and they do not come off the field. And that is the issue. It's not rotation for rotation's sake is dangerous. You can get away with it against 95% of the teams that Ohio State is going to play. Won't matter. In the biggest games, it shouldn't happen. And like Georgia, you're right. Georgia played a million guys. They recruit the position much better, as you said, but there is a point to which that stops, and that needs to be the case for Ohio State. And maybe the smaller arsenal of players that Larry has to deploy this year will help that. Will help him get out of his own way. I almost hope it does, because there's no excuse. There's no way you can convince me that it is proper practice to not have your 4 best defensive linemen, whoever you deem them to be, on the field in the most high leverage moments. And there were too many times last year where that wasn't the case.
Yep. I mean, I should have spent more time over there. It was when Larry, as you said, we could have asked more questions of Larry. I've had this conversation with him before, and it has, like, clearly he doesn't have to agree with me. And agree to disagree is just about the only thing I think that we can do at this point. But like, the next question is like, okay, well, how are you developing these guys in a spring camp if you don't think that they can stay fresh playing 5 or 10 or 15 more snaps per game over the course of a season? Like, and I understand that the number of snaps that are going to be required are different in a non-conference game or a Northwestern game under better circumstances. Whoever, Rutgers, you're going to be able to rotate and take that wear and tear off their body. But they set up this blueprint that they continued to use no matter who they played, that they were going. It only really happened one time. It was like, this can't happen. And then they stopped for Wisconsin, and then it reverted back to the norm almost immediately the next week. Like, I don't, there seems to, the reason that I bring it up now again, when nobody wants to hear me talk about it in February heading into March, is like, okay, if that's an issue that you don't think you can keep them fresh, then maybe what you're doing in practice no longer works, or the conditioning isn't working and you need to do more than that. If you can't trust your best players to play the amount of snaps that the best players in America are expected to play and compete for a national championship. The second part is that, like, there does seem to be, even publicly, not just privately, some sort of disconnect between what Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles are trying to accomplish. And I am not, and have never pretended to be, an X's and O's guru. I defer to all the former players or other people who, like you, who study it much more. But this is a problem that predated Jim Knowles' arrival, which was that there were coaches who felt like Larry Johnson's pass rush and the defensive line were not doing things that matched up with what the rest of the scheme were doing. So when it bubbles to the surface, and I'm told these things previously, and then they go out and have a press conference where they're sitting 20 feet away from each other, and one says, well, I want a Jack or a Leo. That needs to come from the linebacker room. And the other says, no, we've got this covered over there. And they're publicly disagreeing about that. That sticks in my mind and lends more credence. So there doesn't seem to be the meshing going on that needs to be done to get Ohio State's defensive line to the level that it's long accustomed to being. And I don't know how to fix that for Ohio State, because they have the same guy who's 70 years old and not exactly in the mood, I don't think, to learn a bunch of new tricks.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of things. I guess what I would say is that it felt like during the season, aside from like the substitution patterns, it's just talking strictly about like the way that Jim Knowles wants his defensive line to play. I think Larry Johnson more or less did that. Like, sort of kind of got those guys. And like, I didn't feel like there were times where like the defensive line was freelancing or in the wrong gap or over penetrating. Like, Jim Knowles' system is predicated on, frankly, like not a lot of sexy defensive line work, like guys kind of just clogging the middle and letting things flow outside to the linebackers. And I think they were pretty good at that. And that was a change for Larry Johnson. And whether or not he embraced it, I think they did it for the most part last year. But there is still obviously a little bit of a disconnect there with the stuff with the jack position, and probably with personnel deployment too, I would imagine. So I've always found it strange that was left to the position coach at every position. It's not just a defensive line thing. It seems to me like the person calling the shots on that side of the ball should also call the shots on who's in the game.
Yeah.
And Ohio State, even under Urban Meyer, like really kind of left it up to the position coaches. I think that's probably a philosophical change that Ohio State should embrace across the board. And it's different maybe with depending on the positions and who you have there. But I think clearly too, like, there was a point last year where it felt like Jim Knowles had to and maybe did wrestle that away from Larry Johnson. And then for whatever reason, to your point, like it reverted back and then was kind of the way it's been for the majority or the second half of last season. So I don't know. I don't know where that goes this year. It's frustrating, but it also, like, I don't want this conversation to come off to people as like us thinking that like Ohio State's going to have a bad defensive line next year. Cause I don't think that's the case. I think they have the opportunity to be very good and even take some steps forward next year compared to this past season. But there are some things that need to get ironed out in terms of like the operation of it that I maybe need to feel better about before I think like, oh yeah, like this is a group that's going to be really good next year.
Yeah. I think that's part of the uncertainty, I would say, going into spring. Like I don't have any doubt that JT Tuimoloau is going to be one of the best defensive players in America. And I've always thought that Jack Sawyer had the potential to be one of the best defensive ends in the country. That's the way his recruiting rankings lined up, and he spent enough time coming over to the Woody before he was even in the program to understand that his work ethic would allow him to get there as well when he was put in the right spots. And a healthy Mike Hall, we saw without a doubt in early September how impactful he can be. Nobody really ever gave a clear picture of just what exactly was going on with the shoulder. Even, heading into the Peach Bowl, he was saying he was 100%, and then definitely, in my estimation, didn't play a workload in that game that suggested that he was, or given a green light, or trusted enough by the coaching staff. That's, again, part of the issue, is that there hasn't been enough consistent accountability or information on that to really know why Larry Johnson is picking the people that he is. And I was told at one point, well, they're comfortable rotating. If it's 1st and 10 from the opponent's 5-yard line, they don't, they feel good about putting Javonte Jean-Baptiste out there because he's a first-round draft pick just like the other guys. And I would say, what? Like, that was how they felt. They're all the same. We've got 4 first-round draft picks at defensive end. No, you don't. And if your evaluation is telling you that you do, I'm very confused how you reach that conclusion.
I'm a little a little taken aback that was the evaluation. It's not to say that a guy like Javonte didn't provide value, because I thought played a pretty good Peach Bowl.
Yeah, agreed.
But there's a gap there. Just like there's like, I don't know, like sometimes I watch Tyleik Williams and he is not always the most disciplined player, but his skill set is such that like I almost don't care. Like he's got to play. Like a kid with that size and that agility and that first step, like he's got to be on the field. And like if you look at Mike Hall and Tyleik Williams and Teron Vincent, who was not invited to the NFL Combine and very well might not get drafted, and think to yourself like they're all the same, that is a problem. That like that there is a major disconnect there in the evaluation of talent that is keeping the players with the biggest potential to take the defense to another level off the field. Now, it's not a guarantee. Like Tyleik Williams is in a big spot this spring, right? Like the stuff about like his conditioning, whatever. Like I think that's behind him, and we probably talk about it too much now. He needs to be ready now to step into a bigger role. So if it's there for him, he needs to take it. But the idea that like a guy like that was somewhat limited because you viewed players who were clearly not as good as he is as on the same level as him, like that's an issue. Like that can't happen moving forward. And I guess the good thing is that there's less opportunity for that to even be the case this year with what they've lost at defensive tackle. But it still worries me a little bit if people are looking at the room and evaluating people that way, because that's off.
Yeah, it is. But we're just two guys watching football and talking about it. So, who are we to question one of the greatest defensive line coaches to ever do it? It's not. We'll just watch what he does. Watch him cook in the spring. See what happens. He made it very clear that just like Nick Saban, he's not going to retire. So we can sit back and enjoy the ride and talk about what's happening for a group that's certainly in the midst of a pretty significant transition. I mean, Zach Harrison, I think, will be a lot more appreciated now that he's gone than he might have been for the first couple of years of his career. I think people properly saw his impact and evaluated it accordingly last year, but you take him out of the equation, for all the highs and lows with Javonte Jean-Baptiste, he was going to be part of that rotation before he decided to leave. Take Teron Vincent out of the middle. Like, this is a group that has a lot of questions to answer and a lot of moving pieces. So we'll see how that transpires starting again in 2 weeks. Apologies for going a little bit longer and maybe getting off track. That was my fault. I have a lot of things that I have on my mind about the Ohio State defensive line, and I was trying to compress them into a shorter time frame. Just like Bill's going to have to do in a couple of days when we talk about the offensive line.
Won't do it.
It is, baby. So brace yourself for that one. But you win championships in the trenches, so maybe it's deserved that we go longer with that. And I'm rambling again as we get out of here on the podcast daily for Tuesday. Running low on position previews. That's a good thing. Spring ball coming for Ohio State in 2 weeks. He's Bill. I'm Austin. Thanks for joining us on the podcast daily. We'll talk to you later.